start in the 13th century, when the Vatican, under the influence of the Khazarian Mafia, planted its roots in England. This would be one of the most essential steps in creating the Pyramid of Power, the building blocks of a New World Order. In 1213, King John surrendered the Kingdom of England to the Holy See under the Golden Bull. That means the Vatican took power of England. 2 years later, in 1215, under direct papal authority, King John issued the Magna Carta, Latin for the Great Charter, and established the 1 mile square block called the City of London Corporation as a sovereign entity from England and London. Eventually, the Virginia Company was issued by the British royal family from the City of London Corporation for North American settlements. The Virginia Company of London was a joint stock company chartered by King James I to establish a colony in North America. Keep in mind, natives already had a claim to the land, but that wasn't important to King James. This venture allowed the Crown to reap the benefits of colonization: natural resources, new markets for English goods, leverage against the Spanish, all without bearing the cost. Investors, meanwhile, were protected from the catastrophic losses in the event of the project's failure. Remember, this was a risky project. A successful outcome was uncertain. Nevertheless, the company established a settlement at Jamestown, Virginia in 1607. And over the next 18 years, the Crown granted the company 2 new charters, democratizing its governance and reforming its financial model. So what began as an enterprise of investors seeking a dividend was funded a decade later almost exclusively by a public lottery. By 1618, the company had found a way to use its most abundant resource, land, to tempt settlers to pay their own passage from England to the colony, and then, after arrival, to pay the company a fee to use the land. Still, after all this, the Virginia Company and the colony it oversaw struggled to survive. Disease, mismanagement, Indian attacks, and factionalism in London all took a toll until, in 1623, the Privy Council launched an investigation into the company's finances. A year later, the company's charter was revoked and the Crown assumed direct control of Virginia. Eventually, the Virginia Company was turned into the United States during the Revolutionary War by the Freemasonic Founding Fathers who were serving the Grand Lodge of England. Don't think George Washington was a Freemason? Have a look at his tombstone. We are taught America won the Revolutionary War. But if so, why would the king still be calling the shots? This implies the Founding Fathers of the United States didn't actually free us from the rule of the Crown. This brings us to the Treaty of Paris, 1783. The Revolutionary War ended in 1781, and a treaty was signed in 1783. If the United States defeated England, how is the king still granting rights to America's new settlers, when they were now equal in status because of winning the war? The treaty is more of a permission slip than a demand to be acknowledged as an independent nation. Why would the famous patriots Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay sign a treaty when they knew it would void any sovereignty gained by the Declaration of Independence and the winning of the Revolutionary War? If the settlers had truly won the Revolutionary War, it wouldn't be necessary for the king to grant them land. It would have been theirs by the king's loss in the war. For them to dictate the terms of the peace treaty shows their position of strength after winning the war, meaning the Americans never won. Think of other wars the US had won, such as when they defeated Japan. Did MacArthur allow Japan to dictate the terms for surrender? No way. All these men did was gain status and privilege granted by the king, and this ensured the compliance and subjection of future unaware generations. Worst of all, they sold out all those who gave their lives and property for the chance to be free. Furthermore, when Cornwallis surrendered to Washington, he surrendered the battle, but not the war. Jonathan Williams recorded in his book, Legions of Satan, in 1781, that Cornwallis revealed to Washington during his surrender A holy war will now begin on America, and when it is ended, America will be supposedly the citadel of freedom, but her millions will unknowingly be loyal subjects to the crown. In less than 200 years, the whole nation will be working for a divine world government. The government they believe to be divine will be the British government. All the treaty did was remove the United States as a liability and obligation of the king, reducing the same liability to the Holy See. The king no longer had to ship material and money to support his subjects and colonies. In this right, they had become independent, but not free. They were given liberty and not freedom. At the same time, the crown retained financial control through debt owed after the treaty, which in fact is still being created today, millions of dollars a day. And his heirs and successors and the Vatican are still reaping the benefit of the king's original venture. The following quote from Title 26 shows just one situation where the king is still collecting a tax from those that receive a benefit from him on property which is purchased with the money the king supplies at almost the same percentage. Title 26 U.S. Code Section 1491, Imposition of Tax. There is hereby imposed on the transfer of property by a citizen or resident of the United States, or by a domestic corporation or partnership, or by an estate or trust which is not a foreign estate or trust to a foreign corporation as paid in surplus or as a contribution to capital, or to a foreign estate or trust, or to a foreign partnership, an excise tax equal to 35% of the excess of 1. The fair market value of the property so transferred over. 2. The sum of A. The adjusted basis for determining gain of such property in the hands of the transferor plus B. The amount of the gain recognized to the transferor at the time of the transfer. The British Corporation or the City of London would face opposition in their attempts to force federal law upon the people of the United States of America. The Constitution and Declaration of Independence was written to protect the sovereign rights of its people by defining the boundaries of federal reach from the Crown. But it appears the Crown willingly allowed for their independence, not by losing the war, but by winning it, and strategically benefited every step of the way. How could they get away with all this control? They were protected by their law of commerce, or law of the water, which the U.S. was officially under by 1868, enslaving people from birth through citizenship, a form of trickery used in law that surrendered a woman or man to the title of person, serving under office which surrendered their sovereignty to the state, all in exchange for federal benefits, tricking them into a contract, thereby linking a real person into a business entity, ridding them of rule by law of the land, and allowing for them to commit to being controlled by maritime admiralty law, or the law of the water. To better understand the law of the water and how the Vatican used its commerce to control the world, here's the brilliant Jordan Maxwell explaining the concept of maritime admiralty banking law.
You've heard the term law of the land, but in point of fact, that's precisely what this word means, law of the land, because it is the people who live on land. And that is opposed to something else called the law of the high seas, or the law of water. You need to understand the difference. The law of the land is the law of the culture that lives on the land. And so consequently, the law of the land is different in every country. You can do things in America you can't do in Russia. You can do things in Africa you can't do in England. So the law of the land is the law of the culture that lives on that particular land. However, there is a higher law that dominates the entire world. It's called the law of the water, or the law of the high seas. The law of water is referred to as the law of money. It doesn't matter what color you are, where you're from, or where you live. Money is money. And anytime you're doing banking or using money, you are now under the law of water, maritime admiralty. If you go back in history, in ancient history, where all of this began, back in the land of Cana, and you probably have heard in the Bible, the land of Canaan. The Canaanites were Phoenician bloodline, and in the ancient Phoenician language, Cana meant merchant, banker. The very word merchant comes from mer, M-E-R, for the sea, for water. As in mermaid, we have merchant. Merchant, bankers. Let me give an example of the difference between the law of water and the law of the land. The law of water, as I said, is a law of banking, money, as opposed to the law of the custom of the people or the law of the land. The Statue of Liberty must be put in water. It could not be put on American land as such. It had to be put in a harbor because it's not the Statue of Freedom. It's a Statue of Liberty. Liberty is what a sailor gets when he pulls into port on a ship. He gets liberty. He's not free. So America is not the land of the free and the home of the brave. We're not free or brave, period. We're not free. This is not a free country. Now let me give you an example of how this law of the water works. Why is it that you have to go to court? People are always concerned about going to court. You go to court because you play basketball and tennis on a court. How do you play tennis on a court? You play with a racket. Why? So that's what it is. It's a racket. And make no mistake, they do not pick words by chance. These words are very serious. They do not use words in terms with no avail. These words are very important. When you go into a court, what's the idea of going to court? It's a game, like basketball. The whole idea in a court is to put the ball back in the other guy's court. One team gets up and they throw the ball over to that team of lawyers. That team gets up and throws the ball back into their court. And consequently, it's a ball game. And the judge is wearing a black robe, so he is the referee. The judge is the referee. He doesn't care which side wins or loses because he's going to get paid anyway. So he couldn't care less. He's merely there as a referee, and that's why he wears a black robe. And that's another interesting subject we can get into later. But the judge is a referee between two teams. The judge, we are told, rules from the bench. The word bench in Latin is a bank. Therefore, the judge rules for the bank. Where do you find banks? You find banks on both sides of a river. They're called river banks. And what does a river bank do? It directs the flow of the current sea. The juice. Consequently, your money is currency because it's the flow, the cash flow. And I'll give you an example of how this works. When a ship pulls into a harbor, all ships are referred to as female. Airships, rocket ships, sailing ships are always female. Why? There's a very good reason. Maritime Admiralty banking law says all ships are female because they're carrying items. They're carrying items for money, and so consequently they are under Maritime Admiralty law. Admiralty is where we get the word admiral, admiral of the Navy. Let me give you an example of how this works. When a ship pulls into a harbor, it parks at the dock, and it ties off at the dock. The captain has to provide for the port authorities a certificate of manifest, because yesterday the ship was not here. But this morning the ship pulled in, so it has manifested. So consequently, all the products, the $800 million worth of TVs or Toyotas, have manifested. So each one of those items coming off of that ship has come off of water. And they has come in a ship. And consequently, on a ship, all ships have a captain. The word captain comes from a Latin word capital, money. So the captain represents the money that's on board the ship. And as I said, the captain has to present to the port authorities a certificate of manifest for each and every item. How much does it weigh? What color is it? How many doors does it have? Etc. And consequently, the captain presents a certificate of manifest. The ship is sitting in its berth. Wherever a ship sits when it docks is called its berth. She sits in her berth, berthing a ship. Consequently, all the items, as I said, coming off that ship represent money. They came in on water. They are maritime admiralty product. And this is true all over the world. Now, when you were born, your mother's water broke. And when your mother's water broke, you came out. And this is why you have to have a birth certificate, because you are a maritime admiralty product under international law. You are considered, your body is considered a maritime admiralty product. Your mother delivered you. This is why if you go to Sears and buy a refrigerator, they will ship it to you. They will deliver it. That's why you were in your delivery room. Your mother was delivering a product. Maritime admiralty. You came down your mother's birth canal. And once you, and as you're taking one of the televisions or the cars off the ship and it falls down and breaks, that's all right. Sometimes they're stillborn, so consequently you've lost money on that one. Therefore, you have to have a death certificate, and it's always signed by the doc. The doc has to sign your birth certificate and your death certificate. All of these words and terms are maritime admiralty banking words. And therefore, if you understand lawyers and judges and courts and government are all under international maritime admiralty law. All religions, all churches in the world operate under maritime law. This is why all churches are divided into denominations, like 20s and 50s and 100s. Serious. This is why they're called denominations, because all churches are nothing more than the product of maritime admiralty banking. It's an extraordinary story of occult treason, high treason and crimes against the state. Make no mistake about it. There has never been a country on the face of the earth as far back into history as you can go. There has never existed a country in which the people rose up and demanded their right to be free. Never. The concept of human, spiritual, intellectual, and physical freedom is a totally concept that has never, ever existed on the earth. The only time that has ever come into existence was the founding of this country, where it was understood that we were sovereigns and we owned our bodies, and consequently, since 1868, we're now on the International Maritime Admiralty Law.
It would take just 100 years from the signing of the peace treaty for the Crown to implement control of the American people. They did so by tricking the sovereign into submitting to a maritime admiralty law in exchange for goods and services provided by the Crown. 1865. The 13th Amendment made it so people could volunteer into slavery by accepting federal benefits. In 1868, a privately owned foreign British corporation called the United States was created and incorporated in Delaware. Also in 1868, the 14th Amendment defined two new legal entities. One, a citizen of the United States, and two, a person, both subject to the federal government jurisdiction as agents or officers and or employees of the government. It is then stated that no state could infringe or deprive any U.S. citizen or person of their privileges and immunities as U.S. citizens. Of great importance was the use of the terms privileges and immunities as opposed to rights. As persons or citizens, that is, agents or employees of the private foreign United States corporation, they had no rights within that corporation. They possessed only privileges granted to them by that private foreign corporation called the United States. In 1871, the Organic Act was passed and was titled An Act to Provide a Government for the District of Columbia. Congress, illegally acting on its own behalf, created a separate form of government for the District of Columbia. Congress, realizing that our country was in severe financial difficulty, cut a deal with the international bankers, in the process incurring more debt to those bankers. In 1874, the Internal Revenue Code was created and is the body of law that codifies all federal tax laws, including income, estate, gift, excise, alcohol, tobacco, and employment taxes. And lastly, the Vatican and the Holy See would become officialized by becoming sovereign in 1929. Now, the New World Order had its three power centers: Washington, D.C., the City of London, and the Holy See of the Vatican. Is it starting to make sense how the British Virginia Company venture had failed, was then taken up by the Crown, and then created the foundation of Washington, D.C. in the same way the Pope acquired the City of London from England, in turn manipulating their laws, rendering them both into money-making machines, enslaving the people of both England and eventually the people of the United States? Now that you're aware how power was taken politically, it's important to see the historical origins that this political power had covered up. The Holy See uses Latin for official documents, and the Vatican uses Latin as its official language. Novus Ordo Seclorum is Latin and translates to New Order of the Ages and is on the United States Great Seal and the US dollar bill. Can it get any more obvious than that? Now ponder this. Washington, D.C. is located in both Virginia and Maryland, that is, Virgin Maryland. Also note that stated in the Catholic Encyclopedia in 1669, D.C. was originally called Rome. Some may believe ancient Rome was in America, since Rome, Maryland, which is Washington, D.C., was the first Vatican city. A branch of the Potomac River was called Tiber Creek, which was named after the Tiber River in Rome. Like Rome, Washington, D.C. has 7 hills, whose names are Capitol Hill, Meridian Hill, Floral, Forest, Hillbrook, Hillcrest, and Knox Hill. Washington, D.C. is filled with Roman architecture and has the Roman fasces symbol all over U.S. federal buildings, with Capitol Hill being named after Capitoline Hill from Rome. Washington, D.C.'s origins are becoming more obvious. All this implies the federal government of the United States is based upon the principles of the Roman Republic, which was a fascist empire, and fascism means a centralization of power. The word fascist comes from the Roman fasces, which is a bundle of rods with a projecting axe blade carried by a Roman officer, also known as a lictor, or an executor, which was a symbol of a magistrate's power and used as an emblem of authority as well as a beating tool for punishment toward anyone who disagreed with Roman laws. Lastly, the logo's column symbolizes the political support that maintains their claim to governmental land ownership. Symbols in architecture are remnant clues to our true history. Since the Moors were the Tartarians according to the Gothic architecture all over the world, but mainly in the Americas, this means that modern-day Europeans did not build any of these Greco-Roman Gothic structures in Old World America, because a previous advanced American civilization called Moors and Berber Indians civilized the ancient world. keep in mind that the construction of New York skyscrapers, such as the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Tower, and bridges of the New York and New England area, were prominently built by male members of the Mohawk Indian tribe, and they were nicknamed skywalkers, as they would work hundreds and thousands of feet in the sky without harnesses. More evidence that points to Rome's influence in America comes from Rome, Georgia, and the Cherokee Indians, who are known to call themselves Romans. Remember in History Unraveled, America was shown to be inhabited by native Mongol Tartarians, who are the Native American tribes we've learned of in school, but contrary to what we were taught, the majority of these tribes were black. And the slave trade fabrication hid the fact that the Moorish civilization was in America prior to the African slave ships that brought them. This was done to hide the truth of the mass American genocide. And the Cherokee Indians were one of the native Tartarian tribes. Oddly, the Cherokee called their land Rome. To add to that, it is said to their dying breath, the Cherokee natives of that time called themselves Romans. Contrary to public school teachings, the Cherokee were living in Western-style houses. In fact, they were living inside of antebellum mansions before settlers turned them into plantations. Eventually, the Cherokee were expelled from their land and lost their property in the 1830s. This happened during the forced Trail of Tears. It took hundreds of years to do it, but the power-hungry colonists eventually took it all over. In the following 50 years, we'd see America fully become corporatized. So, which Rome came first? Could it be that Rome was here first, and everything afterward was built in Italy? Did they rewrite history to make us think otherwise? This theory is up for debate, but there is evidence that points to ancient Greece and ancient Rome having their roots in America. For starters, much can be learned by studying their money, their coins. A comparison between Greek, Roman, and US coins demonstrate that ancient Greece and ancient Rome were in the Americas. These coins are very similar, with the head and the eagle on all of them. The original coin was the head of the virgin goddess Columbia and her eagle, owl, or phoenix. However, the US Mint in 2017 made a gold coin of the original black Greek goddess, or Greek virgin goddess Columbia, with her eagle on it, valued at $100. The Greek virgin goddess Columbia was a black Greek. We can see that in images. Greek is Creek, the Native American tribe. If the Native American tribes were black, it would explain the black Greek, or Creek, goddess Columbia. Columbia was patterned after the ancient Egyptian goddess Isis. Columbia is also the symbol of America, since she symbolizes liberty, freedom, and justice. Is this why Rome, Maryland eventually became known as Washington, D.C.? D.C. standing for District of Columbia?